Good evening. I'd like to call our Town of Sidney regular council meeting on Monday, June 12th to order at 6 p.m. I'm Mayor McNeil Smith, and colleagues joining me in the council table to my far left, Councillor Novick, Councillor O'Keefe, Councillor Rintoul, to my far right, Councillor Duncan and Councillor O'Keefe. And good evening to Councillor Duck, who will be joining us via audio. Councillor Duck, can you confirm your audio?
Good evening, and thank you very much for having me from a distance.
Thanks, Councillor Duck. When we do come to motions, Councillor Duck, I'll turn to you specifically if you are, give you the opportunity to be in favor or opposed.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And good evening to members of staff, for members of the public in attendance here tonight in the chamber, and also who may be watching online. We have our Chief Administrative Officer, Mr. Humble, our Corporate Officer, Ms. Nelson, thank you. We have our Director of Engineering, Parks and Works, Ms. Clary, our Manager of Engineering, Mr. Demare. We have our Senior Manager of Current Planning, Ms. Verhagen, our current Senior Manager of Long-Term Planning, Mr. Newcomb, our Interim Manager of Finance, Kathy Chen, and our Manager of Communications, Ms. Judson. Thank you for joining us. I don't believe we'll have any staff joining us via Zoom this evening, Mr. Humble. All are in attendance. And good evening again to all members of the public here in the chamber who may be watching the live web stream or a recording of our meeting at a later date. I'll now turn to approval of the agenda, and before I do so, we do have some changes since the agenda was published last Thursday. And the additional information that we will consider received and on the agenda when we approve the agenda as amended will be an additional map. It's map 7, the priority sidewalk network, which will form part of the draft active transportation plan. We have 30 pieces of correspondence regarding the draft active transportation plan, and those items will be placed under on the agenda under 4D1. And we have an additional piece of correspondence. We have under 15.5, which is a letter under correspondence for information. We received a letter from Mr. Moffatt, and this additional piece of correspondence is our Senior Manager of Current Planning, Ms. Verhagen, the reply to Mr. Moffatt. So that will go under accompany 15.5. And then under 1511, which was a letter received at the town, Councillor Duck provided a response in addition to staff, and Councillor Duck's response will form part of 1511. So with those additional pieces of correspondence and information, I would seek a mover of the agenda as amended.
So, second.
Moved by Councillor Rintoul, seconded by Councillor O'Keefe. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. And my apologies, I missed the territorial acknowledgement this evening. And I want to acknowledge with respect that we're holding our meeting this evening in the ancestral lands and territory of the Wasanich Nations. On the peninsula we have the Sartlet Nation, the Sawat Nation, the Pakwachin Nation, the Sycam Nation, and the Malahat Nation. And we express our gratitude for their stewardship of these lands for millennia. And I know we strive to continue to learn as we live, work, and play, and live together with Sanish people on the peninsula. I'll now turn to our public participation opportunities under 4. Our first under 4A is our regular public participation period. Members of the public will know we provide members of the public to come forward and address council for up to 4 minutes. We ask that you provide your name and the municipality that you reside in, the topic that you're speaking to, and the floor will be yours for 4 minutes. And so for a first time, I'll ask if there is anyone wishing to come forward this evening to address council. Please come forward. And I think you do know there's a little button at the bottom there to make the mic live.
Gwyn Davey, Ardwell Avenue, Sidney, BC. Just a point of clarification. On the sidewalk map, it has a long red line all the way down Ardwell, but Ardwell has been moved to the number 20 position. but it says on the website, and when I was here at the May 8th meeting, it says construction along the north side of Ardwell. This item was modified. A sidewalk on the north side is now planned only for the vicinity of the bus stop near Semister Place, with a goal of improving accessibility to public transit.
So you're seeking clarification on the map versus, and the resolution that council provided?
I'm just seeking that the sidewalk, the entire vicinity of Ardwell, because it was mentioned by one of the councillors about the blind corner at Resthaven and residents losing some of their front yard and whatnot they were concerned about. So I'm going with this one, but I just wondered because the map is still illustrate of the entire length of Ardwell, so.
Sure, thank you for the question. And when we come to the item on the agenda, we can ask staff about the map, but I can tell you that by resolution at that May meeting, council did resolve to remove all portions of that sidewalk except for a portion of sidewalk connected to the bus stop.
At Semister, okay, great.
And associated with that, council also passed a resolution that there would be a crosswalk.
Yes.
Across Ockwell, which will be to be designed at a future date.
That's what I got, and I went onto the website and played back the discussion a couple of times, and I thought, I don't know why this is this big long red line when this came up at the meeting, voted on, and off we go. Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, thanks for seeking clarification. I invite a next speaker if they wish to come forward. Please come forward.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Gerald Moffatt, and I live in Sidney at 9512 Lochside Drive. Tonight's agenda package includes a letter from me to Mayor and Council. The letter is about a staff report to Council for the January 16th meeting, and that was concerning the major development at 2180 Beacon Avenue West. Now, the staff report made reference internally to another document, the West Side Village Master Plan, and that document has never been made publicly available to the public. Town staff represented that the document has been used, not only in conjunction with 2180 Beacon Avenue as a project, not only for development of the OCP, but that most importantly, it will be used as part of the drafting of the zoning plan, the zoning bylaw that is upcoming. It is important that this crucial document be accessible to the public, and accessible without being eviscerated with major redactions that essentially destroy its key content. As in my letter, I urge Mayor and Council to direct town staff to release this document to the public with few or no redactions. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Moffatt. And as we received on our agenda as an item after the agenda was published, staff did respond to your letter on Friday after the agenda was published on Thursday. And I'll just confirm that you're in receipt of that letter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did receive a letter from Ms. Verhagen, and it was a wonderful recapitulation of the preamble to my letter and answered none of the questions in it. Thank you, sir.
Okay, so for the record, I would want to state that the document, the West Side Village Master Plan. So as staff have indicated in the letter of response, the West Side Local Area Plan, also known as WestLAP, that was approved in 2017 by Council, is part of our official community plan. So it is a planning document that is to guide us in the future with regards to those affected neighborhoods. The West Side Village Master Plan was a plan requested by staff from a consultant, and it is a document that staff may use information from, or they may choose not to use the information from, when they are actually implementing the council-approved major plans, whether it's the OCP or any other plans, or whether they're considering an application, a development application, and making recommendations to council that will then come to council. So it's considered an internal document. Staff regularly request technical information from consultants that they use to conduct their business, or to operationalize the direction that they've received in motions and in plans that council has passed. I just want to read the sentence that was also included in the letter, because you made reference to redactions in the plan that was released to you after your Freedom of Information request, and that is a portion of the West Side Village Master Plan was redacted from the copy that was provided in response to your information request under the FOIPA due to regulations in that act. So our staff are not acting arbitrarily in the request to release that information. They are acting in accordance with the FOIPA, the act that guides FOIPA. So thank you again for coming forward. I'll turn to Mr. Humble. Did staff wish to add anything to that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, it's. I think you've said it very clearly in terms of staff reviewing this again based on the Freedom of Information and Privacy Act, and that's. Ms. Nelson might want to add just a bit. Thank you.
I'll turn to Ms. Nelson.
Hello. So with respect to the FOI, I follow the legislation on what is redacted. Of course, the applicant can always submit a request to the Office of the Privacy Commissioner to review the information that I've provided. So if he's not happy with the redaction, that office will review it and contact me and we would discuss that there. So he does have an avenue to go to look at the review again.
Thank you, Ms. Nelson. No, that information is helpful. I'll call for a second time if there's others wishing to come forward to address council. Good evening.
Good evening, John Blair on Sidney. Mayor McNeil Smith and councillors. A comprehensive review of tonight's active transportation plan is proposed for 2033, following what is termed a minor review of this document in 2028. It would appear that not much of this expensive study will be implemented immediately. During the past few years, where my partner and I have observed Sidney's governance, we have noted several previous studies, parking studies, a downtown streetscape study, a waterfront study, a West Sidney study, and others lost in the mists of time. In tonight's agenda package, there are still more letters regarding parking, a subject that absorbs much time and attention in Sidney. One of these letters proposes the need of 14 car owners with single-car garages to store 11 of their 22 cars for free on the public street. So perhaps we need a study about the need for a Ministry of Parking. May I make a modest proposal? Sometime between now and 2033, could we commission one of these costly studies to review the steadily deteriorating air quality in Sidney? Living on Resthaven, near the Shoal Centre, we have experienced a dramatic increase in traffic intensity, speed, noise, and dust. It was striking how during the COVID lockdown, when traffic passing our residence was reduced, the air cleared, the world was quieter, and you could hear birdsong. Nature was healing, but not for very long. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blair. I will just note, and you may be aware of this, Mr. Blair, but we appreciate the point you made with regards to air quality, and the town of Sidney, as part of its climate action plan, does on a periodic basis, and staff would have to help me on how many years apart that is, but we do measure the GHG emissions. We're required to do that and report out on that, which is certainly an important factor on air quality. So thank you for that. I'll call for a third time if there's anyone wishing to address council, further wishing to address council. Seeing none, I'll bring public participation to a close, and we're going to turn to section 4D, our presentation section of our agenda. And this evening we have the final draft active transportation plan before us. This plan, just for the benefit of those who may just be becoming aware of this at this time, Council was presented with a draft active transportation plan last December, and as part of that, after that presentation and certain recommendations, Council approved a consultation period over a period of about 6 weeks from the middle of February, or for the month of February into March, and we had a very large response to that. All of those responses and a staff review of those responses and further recommendations came to Council at the beginning of May. At the beginning of May, early May, Council made recommendations to revise certain portions of the draft active transportation plan and request that they be brought forward back to Council this evening. If you have a copy of the agenda, you'll see that staff, after the presentation we received for urban systems, staff are making 3 recommendations for Council to consider this evening. So I'll now turn to our presentation and welcome Beth Hurford from Urban Systems to our meeting this evening. Good evening, Ms. Hurford. Can you just confirm your connection?
Yeah, good evening. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So normally we provide 10 minutes for presentation if you want to indicate beforehand whether you think you might need more or less of that time. But we would appreciate at the conclusion of your presentation if you would possibly take questions from Council, members of Council. And I'll turn the floor
Certainly 10 minutes should be plenty for the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. And the floor is yours.
Okay, and then please confirm you can see my screen okay.
No, not yet.
Does that look better?
We can see it well now. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And thank you for the introduction. Thanks, Mayor and Council, for having us again this evening. We're happy to be here to present the final draft of Action Transportation Plan. As a reminder, and thank you for that overview, Mr. Mayor, we have gone through a process which launched in March of 2022. Most recently, we brought forth the results of our phase 2, or round 2 engagement. And with that, we heard many messages from the community and discussed opportunities to improve or to better shape the final action transportation plan to reflect that input. So as a reminder, we're somewhere in between finalizing the action transportation plan and that round of community engagement. You mentioned, Mr. Mayor, the many opportunities for input and much of the input we received through pop-up information tents, one public open house, an ongoing a community survey ongoing over the entire engagement period, and then promotions in social media. The numbers are here on the screen and really do indicate the level of interest we received from the community in this initiative, with over 1,000 survey responses and 230 individual pieces of correspondence speaking to the draft active transportation plan. Of what we heard, the key takeaways were concern for possible loss of parking, interest in improved safety and accessibility, a desire to fill network gaps in both sidewalk and cycling networks, a plan that really reflects input from Sidney residents and the character of the community, desire to better connect West Sidney with the rest of the community, and to really think in a forward way. As far as the prioritization projects that we focused on, or that we heard most of from the community, were around concerns with the 5th Street protected bicycle lanes. They came up as kind of #1 area of concern. Same thing goes for the proposed Bevan Avenue bike lanes. These have been moved from high priority to long-term priority for later review. The removal of Mills Road bike lanes also came as a result of the input that was received, and that route has been removed from the network. And then concerns around the Ardwell Avenue sidewalk, with the sidewalk extent moved from high priority to long-term priority for later review, and a crossing improvement added to the crosswalk project list. The changes we have added here in a more visual way, so you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, the long-term improved sidewalk is now identified as long-term, not one of the high-priority sidewalk projects, and a crossing location has been added to better connect the park to the transit facility on the north side. And then Bowerbank Road has been now identified as number 1 priority as through motion from council. Mills Road has been removed. The 5th Street protected bicycle facility remains on as long-term, but is no longer a top priority project. Same thing goes for Bevan Avenue. And then an additional project along Ocean Ave, painted bike lanes from 8th Street to 1st Street has been unassigned priority. We are now then, with these changes, takes us to the final transportation plan review period, which staff are seeking approval for this evening, and then on to implementation of priority project number 1, which is this north-south implementation for Bowerbank Road bicycle boulevards. The design process for Bowerbank Road bicycle boulevard will include engagement along the corridor, and will follow guidance from the BC Active Transportation Design Guide and other best practices. That concludes my presentation for the evening, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Ms. Hurford, for the presentation, and we'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions, and after we have a question or two, I'll turn to Councillor Duck if he has any questions. Councillor Garnett. Go ahead first.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Hurford, for your presentation. I have a few questions, a couple of sort of slight edits that I think need to happen. With regards to my first question, under active transportation facility types, and in our report it's 42 of 99, but I think on yours it would be page 33. And with regards to the connector walkway, and so one of the things I saw several times through the survey responses was in particular the connector walkway from Lochside Regional Trail to Bowerbank, and it's presently a bark mulch, made up of bark mulch. And you mentioned in here that towards recreation, but asphalt or concrete could be a method used, and I'm wondering, and you're looking through this plan, given what the respondents were saying about mobility issues for scooters and whatnot, wheelchairs, if that would be maybe an area that we should perhaps put to asphalt or concrete to make it more usable?
Thank you, Councillor, for the question. In most scenarios, a harder surface does improve accessibility. I can't speak directly to the context for that area. Oftentimes we find pathways, neighboring pathways like that do have issues with drainage, or there are other environmental considerations in that location. So I may have to put that over to staff. If the question is, or maybe a desire to see all pathways of that nature to be upgraded to a hard surface, that's certainly something we could consider in a round of edits for the document. For that site specifically, I may put that over to staff if welcome to do so.
Thank you, Ms. Hurford. I'll turn to staff. Ms. Clary.
Thank you through to Councillor Garnett. It really is, it depends on if council would like to see all of those paths upgraded to a hard surface. That is something, as Ms. Hurford said, could be added to the plan. There are environmental considerations in all of our parks as well, but it's always a balance, right? So
yeah, no, thanks. Yeah, I appreciate that. It's just that one seemed to recurred several times in the survey responses, as opposed to other areas where I didn't really see much communication. With regards to map 7, which is on page 58 of 99 in ours, and I think page 49 in yours, I noticed when it references crosswalk 2 Henry Avenue at the west end of Sidney Elementary, it's actually listed as C5 on the map, so there's 2 C5s. So just a slight, because when I was looking for C2, I couldn't find it, and then I realized, okay, it's just not there. So for user friendliness. With regards to, I'll just ask one more and then cut out for Councillor Duck. The Lochside Trail corridor, and I was reading what you wrote on page 63 of 99 for us and page 54 on yours on the bottom about enhancement and making for a comfortable trail experience. And the reason I bring this up, and I'm kind of want to rely on your expertise on how to handle this, is that there's a section of the trail right now between Weiler and our work yard, which is in, I would say, deplorable condition. And there's been a couple of things done to it. They painted lines around where the bumps are really bad, but then they fade. And now they put up consequently signs on either end, 400 meters bumps, but both signs are located on the west side of the trail. And I notice when I walk the trail several times a week that cyclists don't even notice it, and then they're surprised by the bumps. So I'm wondering what approach you think would be best to take to try and get, given the importance of the Lochside Regional Trail throughout the document and how important it is to our community in terms of transportation actively, how we can best move forward with trying to mitigate that and get it fixed into maintenance, so to speak. What would your approach be?
Thank you for the question. I'll turn to staff.
Sure, through to Councillor Garnett. The town has been having conversations with CRD about Lochside Regional Trail operations agreements. So that is something that we're reinitiating with the CRD, and that section of trail is top of mind when we're discussing with them. The CRD is actively working on improvements to Sidney trails. So right now they are working on the improvements north of Beacon on the Lochside Trail, just north of Beacon to Mill, between Beacon and Mills. And we'll continue to work with them to improve that section between Weiler and the Works Yard as well.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate that. It's been a few years now, so I'm getting a little frustrated, to be honest, with the lack of attention pent to it, because I'm just afraid somebody's going to be seriously injured using it, especially when it's shady in certain parts and you don't see it till you hit it. And if it's a young child, they could lose control of their bike. So it's a safety concern for me more than anything. But I think, given that it is important and it is a representation of our community, and a lot of people actually think we're responsible for it, even though we're not, and it sort of reflects poorly on us, even though I know if it was under our jurisdiction, our staff would be all over it and it'd be fine. But it's just something for me that I worry about from a safety perspective. So I'll leave it there and you can carry on.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett, and thank you for raising that. Thank you to staff for the response. As your representative to the Capital Regional District, I am chairing the Parks Committee this year, and I'm also sitting on the Transportation Committee. And the Trails CRD board has approved that CRD trails are considered, first considerations are through the Transportation Committee now because of the heavy and increasing use of the regional trails, but not just for recreational purposes, but for people traveling, for all commuter and all types of travel. And I will note that we have in the CRD 100 kilometers of regional trail through 4 regional trails, and I do appreciate the priority. Myself and other members on the CRD from the peninsula have noted that improvement, and I know our staff are working with the CRD staff to bring that to the highest possible priority. Thank you, Councillor Garnett. I will turn for a moment. Councillor Duck, did you have questions at this time for our presenter?
No, I don't. Thank you very much for asking.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe and Councillor Novick.
Thank you. Turning to Bowerbank, I'm wondering if you could give us a little bit more idea of what the traffic diversion at Ardwell would look like. So my understanding is that there's a desire to mitigate the traffic going down the Bowerbank corridor. So I'm not sure, is it anticipated that there would be a roundabout there, or that there would be a barrier at Ardwell to prevent traffic from going onto to Bowerbank?
Ms. Hurford, did you wish to take that?
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Councillor. Yes, you're right in that as part of implementing a bike boulevard, traffic volumes would need to be reduced, and that's done through a variety of means in traffic calming. Typically, in this particular case as well, there would be changes to the road classification, and that piece I think would be best for staff to address. The exact treatment at any given intersection along the route will be sorted during the design phase. But not being a transportation engineer, I don't feel I'm in a position to speak to the exact treatment at that intersection at this time.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Hurford. I'll direct the question to staff if they would like to comment.
Through to Councillor O'Keefe, yes, the details will be sorted out through detailed design. Bowerbank is a bus route, so we will have to accommodate buses regardless of what treatment is happening on this road. However, the goal is to discourage other traffic from using Bowerbank as a cut through and instead using Resthaven as their main route to get through town.
Okay. I guess one concern I have is that.
Okay, sorry, Councillor O'Keefe, we're asking questions at this time.
Yeah.
We do
Yeah,
have
I know.
motions.
Yeah, I'm going to ask a question.
Okay.
So my question is, if you're going to do traffic diversion at Ardwell, what measures would be taken to ensure that motorists didn't decide to use Piercy Avenue as a way to circumvent that? And because that's a likely scenario. I recognize that you don't know exactly what you're going to do at Ardwell, but I'm wondering if you've considered that you'll block off that section, and if people are discouraged from there, they'll just scoot around that by going along Piercy, which runs between Ardwell and Bowerbank. And then while you're taking pressure off of one particular neighborhood, you're moving that traffic onto a small street that's not built to do that.
I'll turn to Ms. Hurford or Ms. Clary.
I'm happy to start that, if that's okay with you, Ms. Clary. Around diversion, traffic flowing off Ardwell onto Piercy, with concern being that they ultimately are shortcutting the traffic calming. The traffic calming, even at Piercy, when it comes to traffic diversion, we consider more on a neighborhood basis. It doesn't mean that we'll go through and traffic calm all streets, but considerations of where traffic movement will go are certainly considered through the design phase. So there would be likely measures to mitigate the risk of folks traveling along Piercy in lieu of where they would normally travel along Bowerbank.
Okay, thanks for that.
Please, you have the floor.
So moving on to getting back to the Ardwell sidewalk. So I think what we said on that was that we weren't doing the sidewalk except in the vicinity of the bus stop. So I'm looking for a bit more clarity. I don't know if it's from you or staff in terms of, I don't think it was very well defined in the plan in terms, what does vicinity mean? Is it just the bus stop and the short little bit to Sinister, or there's another stretch that goes down to Markinch? Is it Markinch Place? Yeah, so whether it's that whole block or not.
I'll turn to Ms. Clary.
Thank you. Through to Councillor O'Keefe. That is something we'll sort out through detailed design of this particular location. Because it wasn't part of the original plan to have just a crossing there, there is a bit of detail that needs to be sorted out. So at this point, it's still to be determined through the design for that area.
Okay.
If I may ask a follow-up question to that. In general, the understanding would be that it would be a relatively small section of sidewalk, presumably to accommodate a crosswalk. From the sidewalk on the south side of Ardwell. I'm seeing a nod from Ms. Hurford.
Through to the mayor, that's correct. There was some discussion about potentially having the crosswalk connect to where there's a route to the park. However, we're not sure if that's the best location at this time. We'll have to determine it through detailed design.
Thank you. You have the floor.
Thank you. One of the things in the plan talked about, as mentioned in one of the previous slides, about connecting West Sidney. And I just wonder, I didn't see a lot in there about how the plan addresses that. And I wonder if you could highlight those initiatives or actions that have identified that would help us do that.
Certainly. Thank you for the question. Generally speaking, we've recommended sidewalk improvements along Ocean Avenue West, which would improve connections to the flight path and then up to the crossing on Beacon Ave. As well, the plan, as presented previously, had prioritized east-west connectors, ideally hoping to facilitate movement from across the highway along Lockside and then into the community that way. As the plan sits right now, there are not necessarily many priorities that connect West Sidney as it sits, but certainly some, particularly with pathways in the northern side on the west side of Mills.
Okay, thank you. And one more. In regards to Fifth Street, so thinking about between Fifth Street from Amelia to Sidney, or Sidney Avenue, which was at one time the preferred sort of north-south connector or corridor through the town. Can you just remind me if there was consideration given to that corridor being having bike lanes rather than just a corridor?
Yes, thank you for the question. There were considerations for most facility types along most of these segments. This one was believed to be least impactful as far as negative impacts to have the bicycle boulevard treatment, and so that is what moved forward as far as recommendations. There's transit service along the route as well as parked vehicles, so to mitigate any impacts there and to kind of make use of a lower volume street, that was thought to be the most beneficial treatment.
Okay, and the reason for not considering segregated, not necessarily physically separated, but just bike lanes was then for concern of loss of parking then?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm going back in my memory here. Most likely, typically the cross sections haven't allowed enough space to have painted bike lanes and parking both sides. So where possible and where volumes are low enough that it could meet the criteria for a bicycle boulevard, that is what's being proposed.
Okay, thank you. That's good, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Keefe. I'll turn to Councillor Novick. Microphone, please.
Sorry, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Hurford, thank you very much for your presentation. I do have a couple of questions regarding the public engagement. We had a very extensive public engagement process for this active transportation plan. We had an awful lot of feedback at various levels. And I'm curious as to what the mechanism was for evaluating and categorizing the public feedback on this project. It's the first question of a two-part question.
Okay, may I ask a clarifying question?
Please.
Sure, go ahead.
When it comes to categorizing or theming the input, are you referring to the written correspondence received or through the survey input?
All of it. There were surveys, there were letters, there was people that attended the pop-ups and the public consultation sessions where, I don't know if sticky notes were used or some other means of capturing information. So my question is, all this data that was ostensibly gathered, how was that processed?
Right, thank you for the clarity. So after each event, we'll start with the pop-up events, the input is requested by post-it note if possible. Often participants are not comfortable marking up the boards or posting their own content. So the team of people that are there having these discussions will often write for them and clarify that that's the message they would like to share. We post it. At the end of each event, those are recorded, summarized, and photos are taken of the boards to ensure that we haven't missed anything. We do that in this case, we did that for both events. And then in addition, we did the same thing for the open house. We also, following each event, have a debrief, and just so that we are all aware of kind of the bigger themes that we heard through the discussions with participants at each of the events. For the survey, we summarize based on the export that comes from the survey software, as well as all of the open-ended questions. Some open-ended questions come through with 3 or 4 concerns at times within one comment. Those comments are separated out by topic. So for instance, if a respondent mentioned concerns with Bower Bank, Henry, and then condition of sidewalks, for instance, generally, we'll separate those into 3 comments, and then we compile all based on the separated input. So that is typically done through an Excel exercise, and for input of at this magnitude can take quite some time, and that is the most thorough way that we can summarize input received through long answer and through open discussions. And then for any other engagement, including internal engagement, meeting notes are taken and themes pulled from each of those as well.
Councillor Novick.
Okay, thank you. So the second part of that question is, so you have all this data now and you've sorted it and you've compiled it. How did this data actually help to inform your decision-making process on the active transportation plan and the modifications that were or would have been suggested by this public input?
Thanks for the question. For the input received during the round 2 engagement, that the request from participants was to provide input on the priority projects and other components of the drafted plan. From that, those items that were came out most commonly in conversation or of highest concern. And I should also mention, apologies, I forgot to mention the correspondence. We themed the correspondence in the same way that we would have themed open-ended questions to pull themes from each piece of correspondence. From those, we brought forth the locations, the locations of concern we heard most often with the alternatives to those. So that is where I would see the biggest input, biggest impact from the input we received through engagement through the second round of edits that we've recently done and brought forward to Mayor and Council in May for the option considerations and to present what the community heard and how those options then reflect the input that was received.
Okay, good. And one final question, if I may, and that is, so having recounted all this, are you confident that the current final draft of the active transportation plan actively represents the will of the people who contributed to the public consultation?
Thank you for the question. The responses that we received were, in some cases, quite polarizing. There was certainly a lot of interest in removing many of these priorities, or in some cases not moving forward with the active transportation plan at all. In other cases, there was a lot of interest in pursuing some facilities to a higher standard than what we're proposing here, particularly for the priorities. I think it's a really tough thing to say that I'm confident this reflects all of the input received, particularly as I know additional correspondences are still coming in, which I think highlights the importance of another 2-week public review period to give everyone a chance to see these revisions and assess for themselves if we think we've met their needs.
Great, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Novick. I'll turn to colleagues if there are any further questions of our presenter. Seeing none, I want to thank Ms. Hurford again for your presentation.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, I have a question.
Please, you have the floor, Councillor Duck.
Thank you, and thank you again for your presentation, Ms. Hurford. And this is a question through to you and possibly staff regarding the traffic calming on Bower Bank and the expectation that traffic will then continue down Ardwell to Resthaven. Has there been any consideration of changes to the intersection of Resthaven and Ardwell to accommodate increased traffic volume through there? Because at present, this is a tricky corner to turn. So I'm just wondering, given more volume, if Resthaven can handle that at that turn. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Please I might put that over to staff, but my first response would be that the impacts to traffic calming or any diversion along Bower Bank will be assessed through an understanding of traffic movements in the design phase, but I will put that over to staff in case they've made further considerations or have more up-to-date data.
Thank you, Ms. Hurford. Ms. Clary?
Thank you. I'll just echo what Ms. Hurford said, that it would be reviewed during the design phase of the project.
Thank you. Councillor Duck, you still have the floor.
Thank you. So just to be clear then, there's no planned changes for the intersection of Ardwell and Resthaven beyond the current structure that exists there to carry more traffic. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett for a second time.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to make sure no first-time speakers wanted to ask any questions. This could be to either you, Ms. Hurford, or to staff through you, Chair. As far as when it was Fifth and Amelia Bicycle Boulevard that was mentioned earlier, I know we were talking about a traffic circle at Bower Bank on Amelia, then a half signal at Resthaven, and another traffic circle, I believe, at Amelia and Fifth. And it mentions traffic diversion at Malaview and Fifth. Would there be a potentiality for a traffic circle there as well, or? I mean, I know you don't have design plans yet, but is that on the table? It's just basically the question I would like to have answered.
Through to Councillor Garnett, Urban System would look at, or whoever would be designing it would look at all sorts of different options. I know along Fifth, the idea was to have one location where there would be no through traffic. I'm not sure if it's at Malaview. No, it wouldn't be at Malaview. I think actually at Malaview, the proposal was to change the stop signs so that the stop signs were on Malaview in particular. Okay. I believe that's what Urban Systems had said earlier.
Okay, thank you. And with regard to the Southwest Sidney Boulevard connections, this is just more of a thing I'd like to see added in there. And it mentions, and this is under number 6 on those cycling paths. It mentions Northbrook Drive, Epco Drive to travel north-south. And I think it would be great to have, if you had Northbrook Drive, Eastbrook Drive, Epco Drive on there, because Northbrook is just a little piece of it, whereas Eastbrook is actually the entire street. And I think that would give good clarity to people looking at it. And another question I have is, it's mentioned in the staff about the quick build and semi-permanent option. Does staff have some kind of an envision for what they're thinking? I know it's not a detailed design, but what they might be going with to start with there, just for the public's that lives along there?
Sure, through to Councillor Garnett. An example of a quick build solution could be seen at Bevan and 7th, the crosswalk improvements that were made there recently, with a low curb and the bollard style. Also, District of Saanich is putting a lot of bike lanes in right now that are considered quick build, where they're not like a permanent structure in place. They could be removed if they had to be at some point in the future.
Okay. Thank you. Two more, sorry, Mayor, if I may. With regards to the priority sidewalk improvements, and number 1 is Lochside Drive and 5th Street, West Iroquois to Weiler. So I know I mentioned this before when it first came up. And the RISE had the people, I think Mr. Jarrett had mentioned during his proposal that they were considering as an amenity to fix the path from Schooner Close to Resthaven, or to 5th Street, and then also to do the sidewalk from that position all the way up to join to the Sidney Lines Food Bank. So in terms of the numbers and the distance that we have listed there, and I'm assuming it's number 1 priority because it's important also, but because that as that develops, it's getting to the point where that might actually happen, and then we'd only have to do the other section. So in terms of that amenity contribution, when that's built, that would drop our price, or is that something that we would say we have to decide whether we want that amenity contribution, I guess is a way to look at it.
Through to Councillor Garnett, the portion up to in front of the food bank, that's already something that's budgeted. I believe it's budgeted this year.
Okay.
For the town to finish up that portion. It would be the southern portion that would still need to be completed. I would have to double check to see what numbers were actually included, but I believe, yeah, I would have to double check to see what the actual budgets that were included in here were.
That's fine. But generally speaking, is that why that's up on the list, because it's kind of all tying into what you'd already planned with that development?
This was the highest ranked sidewalk project through the survey that was done, so that's why it was number one, and it also ties in nicely to the development that's happening right now as well. So
Thanks. Good information. And the last question I have is, when do we envision the 2-week period commencing, and what period of spanning would be?
Through to Councillor Garnett, I would have to refer to Ms. Hurford on if there are resolutions made by council to make specific changes to the plan tonight, if those would be incorporated before the 2-week review period, or if that would just be done later during the next meeting. Ms. Hurford, if you wanted to fill that in.
Yeah, thank you. As far as the 2-week review period, there have been minor edits recommended tonight just through the conversation. So the preference would be to action those and then put it out to a 2-week review. Considering that, I believe that a 2-week review period starting on the 18th of June through to the 1st of July could be appropriate, but that 2-week period is quite flexible, and so once staff and council are comfortable with the final draft, that's when we would put it out for final review.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, staff. Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Garnett. I'll turn to, well, I think that was our last speaker. So thank you, Ms. Hurford, for your presentation again and for taking our questions this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Colleagues, we did have some questions that Ms. Clary or other staff did respond to, and I just wanted to provide an opportunity if council, any members of council had direct questions for staff further to Ms. Hurford's presentation. Not seeing any, so we will turn. Council, you're aware that staff have made 3 recommendations. I would like us to proceed through them individually, and I would look for council's direction on the first recommendation. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mayor. Following any edits identified this evening, that the final draft active transportation plan proceed to the final 2-week review period.
Second.
We have it moved in second, and I'll turn to the mover and seconder. Councillor Rintoul.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the suggestion from Ms. Hurford that some of the housekeeping matters be addressed within the document prior to it going out to the final review period. And I appreciate that staff have built into the process the opportunity for this final review by the community prior to seeing this addressed by council one last time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Novick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm satisfied that we have taken into consideration the public engagement portion of this process, which is the part that concerns me most of all. I guess compared to my colleagues, I'm fairly new to Sidney, so I don't have some of the in-depth knowledge or understanding of some of the specific issues that were addressed tonight, but I will leave it to them to delve deeply into those specifics. But like I said, I'm happy with the process. I feel the process has been rigorous. Council has responded in kind, as has Urban Systems. So I'm happy to proceed to the final 2-week review.
Thank you, Councillor Novick. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. So I'm just wondering of the way the wording of the motion mentions edits, does that allow for us to, based on what we heard tonight, based on what we received from feedback, number of letters just today, where would be the appropriate time if we wanted to make amendments or additions or deletions to the plan? Would that be tonight, or would we wait for the 2-week period to go by and then propose any changes at that time?
Thank you for the question, Councillor O'Keefe. I think it's a matter for each council member to decide. Councillor Rintoul did indicate that further to any recommendations that council make tonight, that the final draft be taken to the 2-week review period. So at the end of this motion, we could consider, I will open it up to council members if they wish to make proposed changes to the draft plan as presented to us this evening.
Okay, that's great, thank you.
You're welcome. And so we do have a motion on the floor. Any further speakers to the Councillor Duncan?
Thank you. I think it's just a follow-up, because I know we heard a bunch of kind of housekeeping edits from a number of councillors, and Ms. Hurford got them. I'm just wondering if I can think of maybe there was like half a dozen really regarding the map and updating things. If it would be possible to read back what you have, just to make sure that they were captured when they brought them up, and we're all thinking of the same edits.
Well, they do form a part of the recorded meeting, but I can turn to Ms. Hurford, or if they may wish to refer back to this meeting. Ms. Hurford?
Thank you. Those that I made notes of were referencing the crosswalk prioritization numbers and accounting for 2 C5 projects. So either bumping down to C6 or up to C4, double checking those. The other, I was going to review the language around maintenance for the Lochside Trail. And if there are opportunity to strengthen that, I would ask for input from Town of Sidney staff as far as what language could be considered for strengthening the action to work with the CRD. The other is language around Eastbrook versus Northbrook for the project description in West Sydney.
Okay, thank you. I think the one, and perhaps this is just, it was my understanding, and it was, we did have a member of public come forward about it as well, was just the way that the Ardwell sidewalk is represented in the map. I remember when I looked at it, and I remembered that we deferred the whole thing to long-term except for that one little piece, but it's all represented as one on the map, and I'm wondering if that would be one thing. And I know some of the other councillors had brought up discussion of that, if we could just separate that one of those pieces is a priority for a piece of sidewalk there, and then the rest of that was what was deferred instead of the entire length. I think that would be clearer for the public as well.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. The sidewalk network map differs a little from the cycling network map in that we don't actually have a long-term sidewalk map. So if we were to remove the entire length of Ardwell, as we've originally shown, what we've done is bumped it down as far as lower priority. It's now the lowest priority sidewalk project. If we want, we remove the entire project from the sidewalk map.
No,
so,
I understand. What I mean is that it's all red. It's all represented as one thing. However, part of that sidewalk has a priority attached to it, and the rest of it is now long-term priority. And I think if we could represent those differently, that would have probably, because we did have a member of public come forward with confusion about that, and she had to go back and check, our council meeting and everything. And I can understand. I think a couple of us on council had exactly the same question about just making sure that was represented, differently, so that small piece is represented as a priority, and the rest of it remains as that red long-term priority.
Okay.
Just for clarity. Yeah.
So thank you for that. So to clarify, we would maintain sidewalk project 20 and have a new segment to prioritize the small connections to the transit facility and the new crosswalk location.
Yeah, I think that was what we understood. So, okay, I see other people nodding. We're all understanding. Thank you.
Thank you.
So
thank you for clarifying. I'm happy to make the adjustment. Yeah,
so just for clarification, certainly for the benefit of the public that brought it forward this evening, that the reason the entire corridor is included is because the priority is just a short segment, but as per the resolution from council, the remainder will remain a long-term priority to be considered at a future date. I did note, Ms. Hurford, that sorry, I just had it before me, that the cycling network map has proposed bike corridors beyond the priorities that we have, and they are shown dotted on that map, and I think that's the distinction from the solid lines. Would that be an option to show that section of Ardwell that's not a priority is dotted?
Thank you. Well, I consider it.
I'll just leave it as a consideration.
Okay. I think, though, in response, and thank you for the question, we certainly could. I think that ultimately the long-term sidewalk network for Sidney has coverage on most streets. So it's that section of Ardwell seems to be living somewhere between long-term build-out sidewalk coverage and a priority project. So we can, what I would recommend doing for clarity and not losing it entirely as a priority versus a full long-term sidewalk network build-out would be to leave it numbered as the lowest priority and call out a smaller segment as a higher priority order for improvement.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, any further comment on the motion on the floor on the first recommendation? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you. Councillor Duck, how do you vote?
Yes, in favor.
Thank you. So that motion carries unanimous. Thank you. Sorry, I just did turn here. Let me turn back. And so I would turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
So just a motion arising then,
Please,
if
please
I may.
proceed.
So I'll move that we add to the active transportation the construction of a paved multi-use pathway between Lochside and the Lochside Trail and Bower Bank at Calvin.
Do we have a seconder?
Second.
We have it seconded. I will ask you to motivate Councillor O'Keefe, but we might, and I'll leave it to you to decide, we might consider asking staff in terms of we're directing staff to do that. We've heard that there might, subject to staff going forward with detailed design, drainage issues or what have you, that would prevent it. So I'm wondering if feasibility is a more appropriate word within the motion, but I will leave you to continue.
Sure. Well, I'm open to that. So would it be more appropriate to say to have staff investigate and come back to council prior to approval of the ATP? And then what I said, is that?
Okay, so I do have another question of clarification.
Okay.
So we could just ask them to determine the feasibility. In terms of it coming back to council, we haven't attached a priority to it. I'm not sure that was in your motion, and so I would turn to staff how that would be considered, or if you have a consideration with regards to priority.
So I wasn't necessarily thinking about a priority at this time. I just wanted it incorporated into the plan at this point, and then we could, once it's in there and after we've done the public feedback, we could consider what sort of priority we might want to give it at that time.
Okay, so as members of the public know and council knows, for cycling corridors, for sidewalk improvements, for crosswalks, there is a priority listing. Otherwise, they show up as a long-term priority to be considered at a future time. So I might turn to staff in terms of the proposed motion on the floor is, would it just fall, how would staff prioritize it if we're not assigning priority?
To the chair, I think potentially a solution would be adding it to the sidewalk network as a project. If whether you wanted to add it at the very bottom, just above the Ardwell sidewalk, that might be reasonable. I'm not sure if Ms. Hurford has any objections to that, but that might be a good spot for it.
Okay. I saw Ms. Hurford is okay with that. So Councillor O'Keefe, your motion on the floor, would you like to motivate?
Yes. So my background is I've lived in that area for 25 years, so I'm very familiar with that trail. It's a trail that the town has. It's basically very rough wood chips. It's hard to navigate if you're, say, if you're in a walker, a wheelchair, even a stroller. It's not good even if you're on a bike to go through there unless you got mountain bike tires. So it's not at all accessible. It's also, I think, a very important connecting pathway coming from Lochside Trail. It's a good place for, say, kids who are coming from North Saanich and the North Saanich or Parkland and the Lochside Trail. Easy way for them to cut down into Bower Bank, connect to Calvin. It also connects to a large neighborhood park there as well. So it's, to me, an important connector pathway, but it's just not accessible. So I think it's also prone to, there is drainage issues there. So hopefully, if we spend some attention on that, we can fix that. Because when it rains a lot, the sawdust also gets mucky, and in the rainy weather, it's just not accessible unless you got boots on. So there's my motivation.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to the seconder.
Thank you, Mayor. I think the Councillor O'Keefe said it all.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. Are there any further speakers? I'll call Councillor No.
I'm sorry, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm sorry, but could I just get some clarity as to exactly, you want the connector pathway from Lochside Trail to
So if you're
Bower Bank?
Yeah, if you're at the intersection of Calvin and Bower Bank, it's a T intersection. There's Resthaven Park on the northeast corner.
Yep. I see it here.
There is the chip trail goes from there, from that T intersection, all the way to the Lochside Trail. It's about a half a kilometer.
Okay, it shows up. It shows up as a connector pathway on the plan, and the motion is to turn that into a paved.
Hard surface.
Rather than sawdust
Okay, thank you.
or wood chips.
I'll turn to staff for a moment. Ms. Clary?
Sorry, just to clarify, I think it would actually probably fit better under the cycling network, so that could be added to a non-numbered priority project in the cycling network. That may be the best fit for it, and there's already a multi-use path option for the cycling network, which to fit the criteria that Councillor O'Keefe is describing.
Okay, thank you for that guidance, Ms. Clary. I don't think we need to amend the motion. I think with the motion we have, Council have given us that guidance. Sorry, Councillor O'Keefe, you still have the floor? No? Councillor Garnett?
Sorry, thank you, Mayor. Through you to staff, just because you brought, I was wondering, as I was reading this, if this wouldn't fit better into number 2 in the actual, the next motion, the next recommendation that's made by staff, in terms of the design phase of the, if you're wanting to tie it into the cycling portion of Bower Bank. If your recommendation number 2, proceed with the contracted design, if that would be part of the design phase and might fit better with that recommendation. Just wondering.
Through to Councillor Garnett, would the intent, sorry, I thought the intent was to not prioritize it, but add it to the network, but if the intent was to do it quickly, yes, it could be added to that project.
Sorry, I'll,
Sorry, yeah, I wasn't, that's why I was asking, because it sounded like Councillor O'Keefe was kind of leaning that way, so I'm, again, seeking clarification on what it is that.
As it stands now, the understanding is that it doesn't have a priority, but with what you've raised, Councillor Garnett, I would just like to reinforce, if you will, the perspective that given that the Bower Bank corridor is the first priority, and given what Councillor Garnett, Councillor O'Keefe highlighted, is that this is, I think, an important connection. I live in that area as well and use it almost daily. An important connection between the Lochside Trail and what will become a Bower Bank cycling corridor. And I think Councillor O'Keefe gave the example that you will have Parkland students on one side or Sidney Elementary students on the other side, using this as in a two-way direction. That the consideration that council might give is to add that component to the Bower Bank corridor. Now, we appreciate that council has approved the budget for the Bower Bank corridor, but that would not include a budget for this piece, and as I recollect, it is about a half a kilometer. If staff could comment on the implication if council were to, and there's, I presume, a budget implication if staff were to prioritize that with the Bower Bank corridor improvement.
Through to the chair, yes, we would have to bring forward a budget item in a future year. We have already issued our paving tender for this year, so it'd probably do better to fit into next year's paving tender if that was something that council wanted to prioritize, like for next year.
Okay, so we could, council, I'll turn to the mover and seconder. The council could amend the motion to make it a 2024 priority rather than not having an assigned priority. I think the staff are saying that's the best the best opportunity. Sorry, sorry, I'm just going to hold for a moment. Ms. Hurford, did you have a wish to make a comment?
Oh, sorry, no, I was
Okay.
scratching, but I may have looked like I raised my hand.
No, that's great. Councillor O'Keefe?
Yes, so I'd like to amend it to make it a.
Microphone.
I'd like to amend it to make it a 2024 priority as staff suggests, to link it into the Bower Bank cycling corridor.
Okay, so I'm taking this an amendment to the motion that's on the floor. Do I have a seconder for the amendment?
I'll concur with that.
Okay, so I have a seconder. Councillor O'Keefe speaking to the amendment.
No, I'm fine.
Councillor Garnett? Other speakers to the amendment? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Councillor Duck, how do you vote?
In favor?
In favor, that motion carries unanimous. So we're now back to the amended motion on the floor. Are there any further speakers? Seeing no further speakers, I'll call the question on the amended motion. All in favor? Councillor Duck?
In favor?
Thank you. The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. Councillor O'Keefe, you did have the floor for that motion arising. Did you wish to continue?
No, I'm good for now.
Thank you. So we do have two further staff recommendations to consider separately. If Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll move that staff be authorized to proceed with the contracted design of the Bower Bank Road Bicycle Boulevard.
I'll second.
Second, moved in second. I'll turn to the mover.
Yeah, thank you. I think we've kind of spoken around this in the last motion arising. It's clear that we're looking to move forward some element of this as an immediate priority, and so look forward to seeing staff have the ability to move forward with the Bower Bank portion of this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to the seconder, Councillor Novick.
I have nothing to add. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I have reservations about the Bower Bank Bike Boulevard, but I'm somewhat more receptive. We've got this connector trail, but some of my reservations are that I don't know that this is necessarily the best bang for our buck, knowing that we have the Lochside Trail that is just a block off of the Lochside Trail that runs parallel with entries on and off of that, and so I was leaning more towards the 5th Street corridor, because I think we need something in there. Having said that, I recognize that council had significant discussion on this already. I wasn't here to participate in that. So I will vote in support of it with some reservations, and hoping that we can continue to look at something along 5th between Malaview or Amelia to Sidney at some point in the future. What's in my mind also is, a number of letters that we got today, and I'm having some reservations about only having bike boulevards, and that we haven't made any provision at all in the active transportation plan for designated bike lanes. And I'm not convinced that the measures that we're going to take along Bower Bank are really going to make a significant impact to the traffic in that area. So despite those reservations, I'll support it and see how it goes.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to further speakers. Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. I mean, we did get quite a batch of new letters today, which is, where were they before? And I think Councillor O'Keefe raises good points. We had a good discussion about this, and that having something on that end of town would have been more important. However, as a number of the letter raisers, raise, other cities do this, and of course people are at first very opposed, and then they do them and people love them. What is different about Sidney is that in other cities, usually when people put in bicycle networks, there's something like 2/3 of the people surveyed are hesitant, curious, but they're hesitant, and they would be more likely to cycle if we put in bike lanes, and that's kind of one of the standard findings. However, Sidney had very, very, very anomalous findings in that 46% of the people surveyed said, no way, no how will I ever ride a bicycle, you know, and cut it off there before the anger start. Like, people here are very opposed to it in a way that is very anomalous compared to, you know, even comparable sized towns, because of our age structure. And so I'm satisfied that what we are going forward with now is suitable for what Sidney is prepared to do right now. And I'm hoping that once it goes forward, some of that resistance will, you know, be softened, because once people here are able to see, you know, what a bicycle boulevard can do for their ease of transportation, and an all ages network, that hopefully that'll help us out. But to try to do now, with the kind of structure that Sidney has, I think would have been a worse way to promote happy feelings about an active transportation network. So I'm happy with what we're doing now.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. I'll just further comment, because, you know, Council had a lengthy deliberation in making the changes at the meeting in May, but as we've touched on this evening, the Barrowbank corridor will be a significant corridor, and in particular, we noted at the last meeting that you know, this is a corridor that will link to Sidney Elementary from the north, but we have the elementary school at one end of this corridor, and we have the north of the connection, the Lochside Trail, to both North Saanich Middle School on McDonald Park Road and Parkland High School on McDonald Park Road. So I think we're impressed with the current use of bicycles to those three schools at the moment, and that this will look to see increased use through this cycling corridor improvement. I'll leave my comments there, and seeing no further speakers, I'll call the question. All in favor? Councillor Duck?
In favor.
In favor. The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And we have the third recommendation. Councillor Rintoul?
Thank you. Upon completion of the design, that the construction of the Barrowbank Road Bicycle Boulevard be authorized.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. Councillor Rintoul?
Yeah, thank you. Again, looking to our current budget cycle and kind of the window to action this, I think it makes sense to give staff the latitude to be able to proceed on the basis of this plan, recognizing that there's still time in this 2-week consultation period that we may need to revisit a decision of this nature. But having said that, at this point, from the conversation we've had to date, it appears that we're all comfortable moving forward with this element of the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to the seconder.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I tend to concur with my colleagues. In looking at the map, I'm satisfied that Barrowbank will act as a very substantial collector of bicycle traffic and funnel it towards the downtown area, whether it's to the elementary school or to the downtown core. And Resthaven will do the same thing for the eastern side of the town. And so I think we'll have two fairly substantial north-south corridors suitable for bicycles. As Councillor Duncan said, it's not the nec plus ultra of bicycle paths, but in this day and age, compromise seems to be the order of the day, and this, I think, strikes a balance between ensuring that bicycles have a safe route through the town, and the other side is potential loss of parking and other amenities that a substantial portion of the population depend on. So I'm quite happy to see this proceed as it's presented. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further speakers? Seeing none, I do have, I guess it might turn into a question, but in the staff report it says, as part of the design process, staff intend to complete, in quotation marks, consult level engagement process along with International Association of Public Participation guidelines with key stakeholders. And a copy of that guideline is attached within the package. And staff anticipate this, sorry. And so I guess my question through to staff is appreciating that there will be some level of engagement once the design, or during the design process for this, given the significance of the changes, that is, there may be traffic diversion at the important intersection of Ardwell and Bowerbank, other traffic calming measures. Will that engagement come to council at some stage, or how will that engagement or that input received through that engagement process move forward?
Through to Mayor McNeil-Smith, we haven't gone through any sort of communications plan at this time. The intent would that it would not come back to council, and staff and the consultant designing the project would work with the feedback that we receive and try to mitigate issues that may arise. But the intent would be that it would not come back to council unless that there was a specific request from council that it come back.
Thank you. Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. Building on your point, a question through you back to staff. Getting back to Piercy Avenue again. So my understanding from your previous comments that the engagement would just include the people along Bowerbank. I guess my suggestion might be to also include Piercy Avenue residents, only because I think they're potentially impacted if there's traffic diversion at Ardwell. So any traffic sort of coming, say coming from North Saanich Parkland School, coming down Ardwell and then wanting to turn right onto Bowerbank, if they're not going to be able to turn there, they're likely to divert off. So there might be some concern about traffic in that area. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I resided for a short period of time 2 houses in from that Bowerbank Ardwell intersection, and now only live about 8 or 10 blocks away for the last 22 years. And it's a unique intersection in that we only have 3 two-way entries into Sidney. That is at Pat Bay Highway and Beacon, Lochside Drive, and McDonald Park Road. We do have limited access to Sidney on McDonald Park Road that goes immediately onto Ardwell, unless you turn left onto McDonald Park Road. And it's a corridor that certainly the full north end of the community uses, in part to get through to Sidney Elementary, or as an alternate route to get to Beacon Avenue to exit the community, because you can't exit the community south from McDonald Park Road. So my concern is that if there are significant diversion actions implemented or proposed, is that if just the immediate residents immediately adjacent to on that corridor, they're a minority of the users of that intersection, that there could be some concern, and that council, as this motion is worded, and the intent is that it wouldn't come back to council. And so I think what we're hearing from council this evening is that we're fully supportive of this initiative. Members of the public will remember that in the list of cycling corridor priorities of the 9, the Bowerbank corridor was the 3rd ranked priority, and we have now bumped that up to number 1. So there is support for council for this cycling corridor priority, but when there's significant change in the community, I think while there will be engagement, in this case engagement wouldn't come back to council. So I'm not going to make an amendment at this time, and I'll support this, but I think as we move forward, we may want to give further consideration. I'll look to colleagues if there are any further discussion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? And I'll turn to Councillor Duck.
In favor. Thank you.
In favor. The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you. As a motion arising, I move that the ATP correspondence received following the posting of this agenda be referred to staff for review as a part of the final consultation process.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Councillor Rintoul.
Yeah, and a couple of colleagues this evening just mentioned, the volume of correspondence that came, late once this agenda was made public, and certainly was provided to council to have that input for this evening. But in that we're moving into this 2-week final consultation process, I think it makes sense to ensure that that correspondence is carried into that process and timeline. Thank you.
Thank you. And, I do want to acknowledge, sorry, I'll turn to the seconder first. Councillor Keefe? Thanks. No, I just want to thank members of the public who did submit the 30 pieces of correspondence this evening. And I know council read all of that correspondence. And we had a bit of a discussion earlier in terms of, would council make larger changes or amendments to the draft Act of Transportation as council requested be amended at our meeting in May. And our presenter, Ms. Hurford, at the beginning of the meeting this evening, made reference to the 1,070 survey responses we had during the 6 weeks of consultation, the well over 300 website page visits, the 6 stakeholder and community partners engaged, which included pop-ups and the open house. 48 comments were provided on a mapping tool that was provided in phase 1, and we had two apart from the survey responses and there being an open-ended question on the survey response, we had an additional 230 pieces of correspondence received, and all of that was I think duly considered at our meeting at the beginning of May. So I'm not discounting the 30 pieces of correspondence that we've received this evening, and Councillor Rintoul's motion is actually to move those items of correspondence to to accompany the other input we received during this last 2 weeks or during this next and last 2 weeks of public engagement. So I think council will respond appropriately once we receive not only the feedback tonight, but once we receive the feedback from that further 2-week engagement period. And with that, seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? And Councillor Duck? Councillor Duck did indicated that he might have some connections.
In favor.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. And that motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And with that...
I'm in favor.
Sorry, Councillor Duck? No, thank you. It's the motion carried unanimous. Thank you.
Sorry, again, I'm just getting, thank you.
Okay. Turning back to our main agenda, we're now turning to section 5, which is bylaws. And we have bylaw number 2256, which is Reserve Fund Establishment Amendment Bylaw. And we have considered this at previous meetings, given first, second, and third readings, and we have a recommendation.
I'll move
Councillor
adoption.
Sorry, Councillor Novick?
I'll move that the bylaw be adopted.
Second.
Moved by Councillor Novick, seconded by Councillor. All in favor? The motion carries. Councillor Duck?
In favor.
Thank you. Motion carries unanimous. And we are turning now to section 6, which is development permits and development variance permits. And the first under item 6A is development variance permit number DV100338 at 9614 Epco Drive to reduce the minimum setback for a heat pump. At our last meeting, we directed staff to provide notice to nearby residents. We've received no submissions, and we have a recommendation. Councillor Novick?
I'll move that the development variance permit number DV100338 be approved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Thank you. Councillor Duck?
In favor.
Thank you. The motion carries unanimous. I'm now turning to item 6B, which is development variance permit number DV100334 at 9675 3rd Street to reduce the parking requirement for a secondary suite. We have 2 written submissions as of June the 7th, and we have a recommendation. Councillor Novick.
I will move that the development variance permit number DV100334.
Your mic, please, Councillor Novick.
I'm sorry. I'll move that the development variance permit number DV100334 at 9675 3rd Street be approved.
Second?
Thank you. Councillor Novick, the mover, do you have any comment?
No, I think the letters in support are sufficient at this point.
Thank you. I'll call the question. All in favor? Councillor Duck?
In favor.
Thank you. The motion carries unanimous. And we're turning to 6C, the development variance permit number DV100339 at 10412 Resthaven Drive to retroactively increase the maximum permitted size of a secondary suite.
I'll move the development variance permit be approved.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? This was considered and deliberated on by council at the previous meeting before we requested notice go out to residents, and we did have the rights. 1 written submission which was in support. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. And just, I think I asked this question from staff last time, but just to clarify, it's our intention to pull these new size limits and things into our updated zoning bylaw? Or do you require a motion from council to do that?
I'll turn to Ms. Verhagen. Good evening.
Thank you. Through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, as staff indicated at the last meeting, there's no need for a motion to do that. We're looking at that as part of the zoning bylaw review.
Right. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? Councillor Duck?
Approved.
The motion
In
carries.
favor.
Thank you. The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We're now down to number 7, adoption of minutes, and I would look for a mover of the to adopt the minutes of our regular council meeting of May 23rd.
I so move.
Moved by Councillor Novick,
Second.
seconded by Councillor O'Keefe. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, all in favor? Councillor Duck?
In favor.
The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We have no business not completed at a previous meeting or rise and report from in-camera meetings. Nothing under mayor's report this evening. I'll turn to council reports, and we do have a verbal report from Councillor Garnett as our liaison to the Shaw Centre for the Sale of Sea. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Attended the latest board meeting on May 30th. Financial performance was given up to April 30th of this year, 2023. The net result is that the centre had a surplus of just over $85,000 compared to the original plan of $15,000. The revenue is $19,000 above plan, and expenses are $51,000 below plan. They've done multiple capital investments in the facility, not all the ones that they were hoping because they only have so much staff capacity to be able to accomplish them all. As far as the operating plan, which was put forth on March 28th, they're forecasting, and they were forecasting at the time a net year surplus of $52,000. So they're doing better than they thought they would. The money at that point was all going to be put into the capital reserve fund, which will leave them at a balance of just under $170,000, and while leaving the operating fund reserve at a balance of $200,000, which is what was suggested by town staff. And of course, if they continue to do well and exceed those numbers, they will put the extra on top of that back into the capital reserve as well, so it'll help make that fund healthy. And the plan for next year is to break even and to do $25,000 in capital investments. They forecasted back then that they would have approximately 66,000 visitors come through their doors, and at the meeting I attended, they figured they were still on target to make those. And I think it's important to remind the community that back in 2019, pre-pandemic, they were at 70,000, so they're almost back to where they were, which is a great sign for their facility and for the community at large, actually. And I wanted to touch base on the 4 main strategic goals that the center has. To be an education leader, to be a reputable leading community aquarium, have expanded outreach and engagement, and be a strong and sustainable organization. And this all focuses back to when they came to us back in 2018, 2019, trying to improve their position, which they've done a tremendous job of doing. And just to give you an example of this, they held their first World Oceans Day on June 4th on a Sunday. It was from 11 to 3. It's the first time in 3 years they've been able to do it. I was there for about 2.5 hours. There were booths all over that they organized with the CRD parks. There was activities everywhere for kids. There was face painting. And they estimate they had over 1,000 people come through. So it's an amazing job. And of those, 320 actually went into the center. So all those boxes are ticked in the strategic goals, and things like this and activities like this just do nothing but help to promote not just the facility but the community of Sidney, and will bring people here and help us in immeasurable ways. And the final thing I want to mention is that their current exhibit, Seaweed, Mysteries of the Amber Forest, will be running, it's extended until January 2024, so if you haven't had the chance to go see it, you should. It's absolutely beautiful, and actually tomorrow morning I'm getting to meet the artist, so I'm looking forward to that. And at that point, hopefully there'll be another announcement for a next exhibit, but we'll hold off until I'm given the okay that they've locked something down. And that's it for me. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett, and thank you for the very positive report. And I can recall, instead of cutting a ribbon to open that exhibit, I cut the kelp. And it was a good experience. We'll now turn to committee reports, and the first under 12A is the Committee of the Whole meeting from June the 5th. We have received the minutes. We don't need a motion to receive those, so I will turn to Councillor O'Keefe, who chaired that meeting, to take us through their two recommendations.
Thank you, Mayor. So the first recommendation, the committee recommended, and I so move, that development permit application number DP 100839 for the property at 2270 Harbour Road to permit the development of a 3-story mixed-use building be forwarded to the Advisory Planning Commission for review and comment.
I'll second.
Moved by Councillor O'Keefe, seconded by Councillor Novick. Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. I'm actually going to vote against this. My concerns about this is that in our recent OCP discussions over the past year and discussions with the marine sector, we've heard about the need to preserve waterfront.
Sorry, point of order, Mayor?
Yes.
I don't think you can actually vote against the motion you put forward.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, well.
So, sorry if I.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett, for your point of order. Councillor O'Keefe, if I can turn to staff. So if Councillor O'Keefe did not want to support this, should she remove herself as mover of the motion?
That's correct.
Okay, so so Councillor O'Keefe, if you wish to do that.
Okay.
I'm prepared to move the motion.
Okay, so Councillor O'Keefe has withdrawn as the mover of the motion. Councillor Rintoul has acknowledged that he will move the motion. We do have a seconder, and we can continue with discussion. You had the floor, Councillor O'Keefe.
Good, thank you for that clarification. So as I was saying, in our recent OCP and with our discussions with the marine sector, we've heard about the need to preserve waterfront lands for our marine sector. In the OCP, it says that Harbour Road Marine designation is intended to provide land for predominantly maritime industrial uses that support the industry and adjacent marinas, including some limited commercial and some limited residential development. It also limits the number of residential units to 1. That's the OCP. Zoning bylaw is different. In my mind, it doesn't meet the what we're looking at in the OCP, because I don't think the residential units, in my mind, are not what I would call limited. The components are 2 large residential units totaling 8,671 square feet. And we know that there's a shortage of marine and industrial land. As part of our economic development strategy, we're wanting to develop our blue economy and our marine strategy. And I think allowing such a significant encroachment of residential land onto the marine industrial area, I don't think it's a good fit. I don't expect I'm going to change any minds, but I think those were important points to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to other speakers. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you. I'll just note that this as proposed, there's certainly no variances. It is in keeping with the zoning bylaw, and the need for residential property and builds is apparent in the community. So I'm quite happy to continue to support the recommendation of the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll continue to support this. Oh, sorry, Councillor Novick, I'll let you go first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I like this development. I think it's got the mix that we're looking for. It's got the commercial frontages. It's got the residential. It is limited given the size of the entire property. So I think it's certainly keeping within the spirit of the OCP and the bylaws. I remember the proponents saying that their entire ground floor storage level is designed to service the adjacent marinas as storage spaces, in addition to the commercial units that are going to be there. So I think this is the type of development that would really enhance, rather than just having an engine repair shop or something like that. I'm not naysaying engine repair shops, but this development addresses a lot of different programs in the area, and I can't imagine something that would do a better job of meeting the spirit of what we would like in that area. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Novick. Councillor Duck, did you wish to have any discussion?
I'm good, thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor O'Keefe. Councillor Duck, how do you vote?
In favor.
We have one opposed. Councillor O'Keefe. The motion carries. Thank you.
And I'll move along to the next resolution or recommendation from committee, and that is Development Permit Application Number DP 100836. The committee recommended, and I so move, that this development permit for the property at 10473 Resthaven Drive to permit the construction of a multifamily residential building containing 18 units be forwarded to the Advisory Planning Commission for review and comment.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Councillor O'Keefe.
No, nothing to add.
Councillor Novick.
Likewise.
Any discussion from council? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Councillor Duck.
In favor.
The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. I'm now turning to 12B, which is the Saanich Peninsula Accessibility Advisory Committee and their meeting of May 25th. And we have the minutes from that meeting that we are receiving for information on the agenda. We don't have a recommendation, or don't need a recommendation to receive. And we do have two recommendations from the minutes. Councillor O'Keefe is our council representative to that committee, so I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe to speak to the first recommendation.
Sorry, Mayor, is it possible to ask questions regarding the minutes at this point before she moves on?
Actually, that it certainly is, so thank you. And I'll turn to Councillor Garnett regarding questions on the minutes.
Thank you. I just have a couple. On page 4 of your minutes, it's mentioned under roundtable updates that there are some businesses in Sydney have removed their accessible parking spots. I was just curious, like, is there many of those and why they would have removed them?
I think that I think that's been followed up by staff. Actually, so it was one of the committee members submitted I believe an issue through our accessibility form. There was one on the west side, the bottle depot, and there was one other one that had removed spots, and there was some rationale behind those, and that's since been addressed, is my understanding.
And if I may, Mayor, just one other question. I was looking for your next meeting date and time, and I didn't see your location. Didn't see it listed at the end of the minutes.
So that should be, actually, I think it's Thursday, July 25th?
No, our next meeting, our first meeting in Sydney is July 27th.
27th.
Yep, and it's at the CSB.
Right.
At 10 a.m.?
At 10 a.m.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. I'll turn back to Councillor O'Keefe.
Okay, thank you. So in regards to the recommendations that are there, I'm going to make some changes there. In regards to the first resolution, it was about the consultation planned with SPAC on the downtown parking. And I've tweaked the motion a little bit because when staff first looked at it, they needed some additional clarity. So the motion that I'm going to make is that staff include in their existing consultation planned with SPAC on downtown parking the issues of residential parking permits and time-limited parking.
Do we have a seconder?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Councillor O'Keefe?
Right, so council may recall that we already directed staff to consult SPAC on the number, location, and design, I believe, of accessible parking spaces. And at the time when we looked at the plan, we thought, oh, those are probably things that they'll want to comment on. However, I continue to be enlightened by SPAC members that there's often things that are issues for them that don't seem apparent to us. So, you know, in my mind, I wasn't thinking how time-limited parking or residential parking permits might be relevant. They gave me a few examples at the meeting. And so basically what we're doing is we're just expanding the scope so that staff will, you know, get feedback from them on those issues.
I'll turn to Mr. Humble.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I may, I appreciate the proposed changes by Councillor O'Keefe, but I'm wondering, one of the I guess concerns I have with respect to the proposed motion or recommendation coming from SPAC or the revised recommendation is the wording around allowing for the issues of residential parking and time-limited parking. So it makes it seem like staff would be presenting those issues to SPAC. And so what I might suggest, if I can, is something along the lines of, and allow for comments or feedback from SPAC on those two additional matters.
Mr. Humble, would you wish to read the motion with?
Yeah.
So what I might suggest, Mr. Mayor, is that staff include in their existing consultation planned with SPAC on downtown parking the issues of residential parking permits and time-limited parking, and allow for feedback to staff by SPAC.
Are you?
Sure.
I think that's a helpful comments and change.
Yeah, that's
Thank
fine.
you. Okay.
Yep,
Thank you, Mr. Humble.
that's all.
Thank you. Any further discussion on this motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Councillor Duck?
In favor?
Thank you. The motion carries unanimous. And Councillor O'Keefe, I'll ask you to turn to the second recommendation.
Yeah, so the second one had to do with the BC Building Code, and I guess the first thing I'll say to council is that I don't get to see I get to see the minutes for SPAC the same time you did, like last Thursday. And so when I looked at them and when I reviewed them with the mayor and staff, I didn't think there was enough clarity there in terms to capture the discussion that was held at SPAC, and not enough clarity in terms of what was required there, because to ask staff to review the building code, that's something that is a normal course of their operations. So I'm going to propose that we refer this back to SPAC for further clarity.
Do we have a seconder?
Second.
Second by Councillor Duncan. Did you wish to speak further?
No, I think that covers it.
Councillor Duncan?
I believe her.
I'll call the question. All in favor? Councillor Duck?
In favor?
Thank you, Councillor. The motion carries unanimous. And thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. We're now going to turn to staff reports under Section 13, and the first is 13A, the Subdivision and Development Bylaw number 1390, Building Area Regulations. We have a report from staff. Staff have addressed in the report the referral that Council made to staff on this item, and with the information provided by staff, there is no recommendation. This is for information only, so we don't require a motion, but I will turn to colleagues if there are any questions on this report to staff. Seeing none, we'll move to the next item, 13B, and that is the tender 2023 paving, concrete curb and sidewalk program. And we have a report from staff. Did staff wish to introduce that this evening? Mr. DeMayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This report brings forward a result from our recent tender that closed on May 31st for the town's 2023 paving, concrete sidewalk and curb program contract. Majority of the work under this contract is for the Gallon Road improvements, which be a great improvement for that area, as well as a small length of path in Melville Park, some restoration of path. And we do have a recommendation on the award of the bid to the low tender.
Thank you, Mr. DeMayor. Are there any questions from staff? Councillor Garnett. If you wish to move the recommendation, Councillor Garnett.
I'll move that the contract for the 2023 paving, concrete curb and sidewalk program, contract number 2023-013, be awarded to the low bidder, Capital City Paving Limited.
Second?
Moved and seconded. Councillor Garnett. Councillor O'Keefe.
No.
Seeing no discussion, I'll call a question. All in favor? Councillor Duck.
In favor?
Thank you. The motion carries unanimous. And we'll turn to the last staff report, that is the monthly building permit report for April and May 2023. There is no recommendation. This is for information only. Do council members have any questions of staff on this report? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item. The next item under correspondence is 14A and CRD. This is regarding two CRD bylaws, CRD bylaw number 4546 and bylaw number 4547, loan authorizations for recreation services, which include the Centennial Park multi-sport box, and the second project is the Panorama Heat Recovery System. And we do have two recommendations, one for each bylaw, so I would look to council if they would consider moving the first recommendation. Councillor Novick.
I'll move that council give consent to the CRD adopting bylaw number 4546, Saanich Peninsula Recreation Services, Centennial Park Multi-Sport Box, loan authorization bylaw number 1, 2023.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? See, Councillor Gunn.
Thank you, Mayor. Just wanted to let the rest of council know, as a member on the commission, that this is a thing that should be put in context, is that Central Saanich got just over a $2 million grant. So it's really, we're really getting good benefit here, and it's going to have a roof that's not enclosed, but it will allow for a greater use of the box and an upgrade of the area. Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Garnett. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor? Councillor Duck?
In favor.
Thank you. The motion carries unanimous, and we have the second recommendation. Councillor Novick.
I move that council give consent to the CRD adopting bylaw number 4547, Saanich Peninsula Recreation Services, Panorama Heat Recovery System Loan Authorization bylaw number 1, 2023.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to point out that as many of us know, the Recreation Center is one of the biggest emitter of GHGs in the CRD. And so this particular plan is going to make a significant dent in what they produce in a given year. So this is an extremely important initiative, and I think well supported, I think, going forward. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, and I suppose through to you, Mr. Mayor, or to Councillor Garnett, there was a fair bit of optimism at one point that a project of this nature, given the environmental impact it's anticipated to make, would be prime for some grant and some support. Does those initiatives continue to try and pursue funding for that undertaking?
Thank you, Councillor. I'll thank you for the question. As a representative on the commission, there was a significant grant that was applied for, and unfortunately the CRD was not successful in that grant application, and the commission gave direction, given the priority of that project within the strategic plan, to seek alternate ways of financing the project. And the commission has considered the budget implications, and that this is a significant project moving forward. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call a question. All in favor? And Councillor Duck?
In favor.
Thank you. The motion carries unanimous. And now we're moving to correspondence for information. So we do have 17 items under correspondence for information. The majority of them do have a staff reply, and we do not, as they appear on our agenda, and Council has given consideration to those, and Council does have the option to raise any item under correspondence for information to correspondence such that we have a discussion, and that was, none was raised this evening. We are receiving those on our agenda without a motion. And I will now move to the next item. We have no notices of motion this evening. We do have a motion to go in camera. I will turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll move that it is in the opinion of council that the public interest requires that persons other than members of the council and officers be excluded from the meeting to consider confidential matters respecting personnel issues and personal information of identifiable individuals being considered for an appointment pursuant to sections 90.1A and C of the Community Charter, and that council continue the meeting in closed session.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? The motion carries. That's Councillor Duck.
In favor.
Thank you. Motion carries unanimous. And I would look for a motion to adjourn.
Move adjournment.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? We are adjourned. We will recess for 5 minutes until in camera. Thank you.